For the past 2 weeks, you watched Mark Carney block Donald Trump's attempt to seize the Gordie Howe Bridge. You watched him turn the F-35 into a bargaining weapon against NORAD threats. You watched him announce $366 billion in defense spending specifically designed to cut American suppliers out of Canadian contracts. What you did not watch, because nobody was paying attention, was what all of this was building toward. February 16th, 2026, a document leaked to Politico, and inside that document, the blueprint for something Washington either missed entirely or pretended not to see. Mark Carney was not defending Canada. He was building an alliance. 40 countries, 1.5 billion people, the largest coordinated trade bloc in modern history. The United States is not invited. This is not a trade agreement. This is a siege. And it has been under construction for months while Donald Trump was tweeting about bridges. Welcome back. If this is your first time here, you are about to understand why the past 2 weeks of drama between Washington and Ottawa were never about bridges or fighter jets or defense budgets. They were about buying time. Every phone call Carney made to Trump, every public statement about sovereignty, every announcement timed 72 hours after an American policy shift, all of it was cover. Cover for the largest diplomatic operation Canada has conducted in a generation. Let me show you the document. Politico broke the story on February 16th. The European Union, 27 member states, and the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, 12 Indo-Pacific economies, are opening formal negotiations to create a unified trade framework. If successful, this alliance links nearly 40 nations across 3 continents. Canada is not a participant in these talks. Canada is leading them. Multiple sources inside the negotiations confirmed to Politico that Ottawa is the driving force behind the entire project. Mark Carney personally championed the idea at the World Economic Forum in Davos. He did not mention the United States by name during that speech, but he did not need to. He told the audience that great powers were using economic integration as weapons, tariffs as leverage, supply chains as vulnerabilities to exploit. He said the old rules-based order was not coming back. He said middle powers had to act together, because if you are not at the table, you are on the menu. That was January 21st. 3 weeks later, Politico confirmed Canada had turned that speech into an operational plan. So what exactly is this alliance? Let me explain the structure, because this is not symbolic, this is functional. The European Union is the world's largest single market, 450 million people. The CPTPP covers 500 million people across the Pacific Rim, including Japan, Australia, Singapore, Vietnam, Mexico, Malaysia, and Canada itself. Together, these 2 blocs represent roughly 1.5 billion people and approximately 40% of global GDP. Right now, they operate separately. Different trade rules, different tariff schedules, different standards for determining where a product is legally considered to have been made. That last part, the rules of origin, is the key to everything. Under current frameworks, a Canadian company that sources components from Japan and assembles a product in Canada cannot sell that product tariff-free into the European Union under CPTPP terms because the EU does not recognize Japanese inputs as part of the CPTPP supply chain. The proposed agreement changes that. It is called cumulation. It allows manufacturers across both blocs to source parts from any member country and still qualify for preferential tariffs. A Canadian factory could use Japanese steel, German software, Australian lithium, and Vietnamese labor, assemble the final product in Ontario, and ship it tariff-free to France. No American suppliers required. No American ports. No American logistics networks. The entire supply chain bypasses the United States. That is not a side effect. That is the design. Now let me show you the timing, because this is where you see Carney's strategy. Donald Trump signed the America First Arms Transfer Strategy on February 14th. The explicit goal of that policy is to make the United States the indispensable weapons supplier for allied nations. 3 days later, Mark Carney announced a $366 billion defense industrial strategy designed to reduce Canadian reliance on American defense contractors from 75% to 30%. That same week, Politico published the 40-nation alliance story. Coincidence? No. Coordination. Trump wanted to lock allies into American supply chains. Carney responded by building an alternative supply chain that does not include America, and he did it publicly, with 40 nations watching. During the same 72-hour window, Trump was declaring victory on arms sales. The message to Europe and Asia was clear. Canada is offering an exit. Trump sees this as a trade dispute about dairy quotas and aluminum tariffs. Carney sees it as a civilizational realignment. Let me show you who is involved and what they are saying publicly, because the coalition is real. Japan is in. Yasutoshi Nishimura, Japan's Minister of Economy, Trade and Industry, told reporters that Tokyo sees major advantages in closer EU CPTPP integration. He said it would strengthen supply chain resilience, which is diplomatic language for reducing dependence on both the United States and China. Germany is interested. The German Chamber of Commerce and Industry publicly endorsed the initiative, calling for harmonized rules to improve cross-border manufacturing. That is significant because Germany is Europe's largest economy and has historically been skeptical of trade experiments that do not include the United States. France supports it. Singapore supports it. Australia is negotiating terms. The European Commission confirmed the talks are underway, although Brussels is being cautious about timelines. One senior EU official told Politico that some people inside the Commission are super keen on the idea, but it is not yet a top priority compared to immediate supply chain fixes. That language, not yet a top priority, is Brussels speak, for we are watching to see if this gains momentum before we fully commit. And the momentum is building. Canada is not waiting for Brussels to decide. Ottawa sent John Hannaford, Carney's personal representative to the EU, to Singapore 2 weeks ago to meet with CPTPP officials and gauge support. A Canadian government official told Politico the work is definitely coming along and described the conversations as very fruitful. That is not the language of a proposal. That is the language of implementation. Meanwhile, Trump is still posting about the Gordie Howe Bridge. Let me show you his reaction because it reveals how completely Washington has misread what is happening. On February 10th, Trump posted on Truth Social that he would not allow the bridge to open until the United States was fully compensated for everything we have given Canada. He claimed the bridge was built with virtually no U.S. content, which is factually incorrect. American steel and American workers built the Michigan side. Trump called Carney the next morning. Carney stated 4 facts. Canada paid $4.6 billion for construction. Michigan already owns half under a 2012 agreement. American steel and American labor were used. The bridge will open as planned. Trump did not block the bridge. 4 days later, he posted that Canada was among the worst in the world to deal with. No explanation, just rage. Then Trump rescinded Canada's invitation to join his Board of Peace, the diplomatic initiative he announced at Davos. The official statement said, Canada's participation was no longer welcome after Carney's speech about the rupture in the global order. That reaction tells you everything. Trump thought Carney's Davos speech was a personal insult. He treated it like a slight that required punishment. What he missed is that the speech was not aimed at Trump. It was aimed at the other 40 countries in the room. Carney was telling them, we have an alternative, and if you want in, Ottawa is coordinating. Trump's response was to disinvite Canada from a peace board nobody outside Washington takes seriously. Carney's response was to finalize the largest trade realignment in 50 years. This is not a fair fight. Now let me explain why this alliance works and why Trump cannot stop it. First, the structure is decentralized. This is not a single treaty with one signature page Trump can threaten to rip up. It is a series of bilateral cumulation agreements between the EU and individual CPTPP members, coordinated by Canada, but executed independently. If Trump tries to punish one country, say Japan, for participating, the other 39 keep building. There's no single choke point. Second, the participants are American allies. Trump cannot impose retaliatory tariffs on Japan, Germany, France, Australia, and Canada simultaneously without destroying NATO, the G7, and every security partnership the United States depends on. He tried this with Greenland. He threatened to tariff Denmark's European allies if Denmark did not sell Greenland. The result was that Canada and France opened consulates in Nuuk on the same day, and NATO deployed troops to defend Danish sovereignty. Trump backed down. He will back down again. Third, the economic logic is bulletproof. Europe needs stable energy supplies that are not Russian. Canada has natural gas, uranium, and critical minerals. Asia needs those same resources. Canada has them. The United States also needs them, but the United States is currently threatening to annex Canada, block infrastructure projects, and impose arbitrary tariffs. From a business perspective, why would any global company build a supply chain that runs through a market led by someone who changes the rules every 72 hours? Diversification is not ideology. It is risk management. And Carney is offering the lowest risk alternative on the planet. Fourth, this is not new. The EU and CPTPP began discussing cooperation in November 2025, immediately after Trump announced Liberation Day tariffs on most of the planet. The framework has been in development for months. Carney did not invent this. He accelerated it, gave it political backing, and turned it into a Canadian-led initiative. By the time Politico published the story, the architecture was already built. Trump is not responding to a proposal. He is responding to a fait accompli. Fifth, and this is critical, Trump has no counteroffer. The America First Arms transfer strategy assumes allies will keep buying American weapons because they have no alternative. The 40-nation alliance is the alternative. Trump thought threatening NORAD would force Canada to buy F-35s. Instead, Carney used the F-35 review to extract concessions from Washington and is now building a defense industrial base that does not need American suppliers. Trump is playing checkers, Carney is playing siege warfare, and the siege is working. Let me show you what happens next, because there is a deadline and everyone knows it. July 26th. That is when the United States, Mexico, and Canada agreement comes up for its scheduled review. The trade deal that governs North American commerce gets renegotiated every 6 years, and this year is the year. Trump has already said publicly that he considers the USMCA irrelevant. He believes he can impose tariffs unilaterally regardless of what the agreement says. That position is currently being challenged in the Supreme Court, and a ruling could come as soon as February 20th. If the court rules against Trump, his tariffs get struck down and he loses his primary leverage tool. If the court rules for Trump, he keeps the tariffs. But Canada walks into the July review with 40 countries waiting as backup. Either way, Carney is negotiating from a position of strength Trump did not expect. Think about the pressure map. Right now, 67% of Canadian exports go to the United States. That dependence is real, and Trump thinks it gives him control. But Carney has spent 6 months building relationships that reduce that dependence incrementally. The China agreement unlocked $7 billion in agricultural exports. The UAE deal brought $70 billion in investment commitments. The Luxembourg Financial Partnership connected Canada to $11.5 trillion in European capital. The 40-nation trade alliance opens accumulation across the largest markets on Earth. Every month those relationships deepen, the 67% number drops. Carney stated his goal plainly: double non-American exports over the next decade. The 40-nation alliance is the mechanism to achieve that goal. Trump thought the July review would be Canada begging for relief from tariffs. Instead, it will be Canada presenting a trade bloc that covers 40% of global GDP and asking Washington what terms the United States is willing to accept to stay relevant. That is not a negotiation. That is a reckoning. Let me address the question you're probably asking. Can this actually work? Can 40 countries with different legal systems, different political priorities, and different relationships with the United States actually coordinate at this scale? The answer is yes, because they are not coordinating on everything. They are coordinating on one thing: rules of origin accumulation. That is a technical trade mechanism, not a political union. It does not require a new parliament or shared currency or joint military. It requires customs officials in 40 countries to recognize each other's paperwork. That is achievable. The European Union and Canada already have a free trade agreement, CETA. The CPTPP already exists. This proposal does not create new trade deals. It connects existing ones. The lift is bureaucratic, not diplomatic. And bureaucracies can move fast when political leaders give them cover. Carney is providing that cover. He took the political risk at Davos. He absorbed the backlash from Trump. He gave every other country in the alliance the ability to say, we are just following Canada's lead. That is leadership. And it is working. The risks are real. The United States could retaliate economically. Congress could pass legislation targeting countries that participate. Trump could impose tariffs so severe that the short-term pain outweighs the long-term gain. But every one of those moves would confirm exactly what Carney said in Davos, that the rules-based order is dead, that great powers use economic integration as a weapon, and that middle powers have no choice but to build alternatives. Trump's threats do not stop the alliance. They justify it. Every time Trump posts about annexing Canada or blocking bridges or punishing allies, he hands Carney another talking point for the next call with Berlin or Tokyo or Canberra. Carney does not need to convince anyone that Trump is unreliable. Trump does that himself. Here is what this looks like in practice. A German automaker wants to build electric vehicles. Right now, they source lithium from Australia, batteries from South Korea, software from Canada, and assemble in Germany. Under current rules, that vehicle pays tariffs when sold into Japan because the supply chain crosses non-cumulative trade zones. Under the 40-nation framework, every component is cumulative. The vehicle qualifies for preferential access across the entire block. No American parts required. The factory does not move to Michigan. It does not need to, or take Canadian critical minerals. Right now, a Canadian mining company that extracts lithium in Quebec faces a choice: sell to American battery manufacturers and navigate Trump's tariff threats, or sell to European manufacturers and pay tariffs entering the EU. Under cumulation, the European sale becomes tariff-free, and the Canadian company has no reason to prioritize the American buyer. Multiply that across every sector: agriculture, energy, technology, aerospace, pharmaceuticals. Every industry that depends on cross-border supply chains now has a framework that does not include the United States. And every time an executive makes the rational decision to use that framework, American leverage decreases. This is economic encirclement, and Trump built the wall himself. Let me close with this. For 2 weeks, you watched Trump threaten a bridge, threaten NORAD, and threaten tariffs. You watched Carney respond with phone calls, defense budgets, and calm public statements. What you did not see, because it was happening in conference rooms in Singapore and Brussels and Ottawa, was the construction of the alternative. Carney was not reacting to Trump. He was using Trump. Every threat Trump made gave Carney another reason to call a foreign minister and say, "This is why we need the alliance." Every tariff Trump imposed gave Carney another data point to show European CEOs why dependence on American supply chains is a liability. Every insult Trump posted gave Carney another opening to position Canada as the reliable partner in a world where America is no longer predictable. And it worked. 40 countries, 1.5 billion people, a cumulative trade framework that bypasses the United States entirely. That is not a reaction. That is a strategy. And the strategy started the day Carney took office when he said in his victory speech that America wants our land, our resources, our water, our country, and we will not let them have it. This is how you stop them. You do not fight American power directly. You make American power irrelevant. You build a world where the largest economy on earth is no longer indispensable because 40 other economies decided they would rather work together than depend on Washington's goodwill. Trump thought he was negotiating tariffs. Carney was negotiating the end of American centrality. And in 72 hours, when the Supreme Court rules on Trump's tariff authority, or in July, when the USMCA review begins, or in 5 years, when the 40-nation framework is fully operational, the world will look back at February 26 and realize this was the week the architecture changed. Not because of a treaty signing or a dramatic summit, because a Canadian prime minister spent 2 weeks letting Donald Trump think he was winning while quietly building the coalition that replaces him. That is not defense. That is offense. And Washington just realized the game started months ago. But here's what nobody is telling you. Trump has 3 options left, and every single one makes this worse for Washington. Option 1. The Supreme Court rules on February 20th that his tariffs are legal. He keeps the tariffs. He thinks he won, but he just proved Carney's entire argument. If an American president can impose unlimited tariffs during fake emergencies, why would Germany build factories that depend on American supply chains? Why would Japan invest in markets where the rules change by tweet? Trump wins the legal case and loses the economic war. Because the court ruling does not make him predictable. It confirms he is dangerous, and that is exactly what Carney told the 40 countries. Do not trust Washington, trust Ottawa. Option 2, the Supreme Court strikes down his tariffs. Trump loses his weapon. Canada gets 7 months of relief before the July review. And Trump walks into that negotiation with no leverage and 40 countries watching. If Carney folds, the alliance collapses. If Carney walks away, the alliance becomes permanent. Either way, Trump cannot win. Option 3, Trump tries to break the alliance one country at a time. Threatens Japan, threatens Germany, threatens Australia. But every threat proves Carney's point, that America uses coercion instead of partnership. And when Japan sees Trump destroy one ally, they do not back down. They double down, because they just learned what happens when you trust Washington. Trump can hurt individual countries, but he cannot hurt 40 countries at once without destroying American credibility forever. So what is Carney doing between now and July? 3 things. First, signing more deals. India, Mercosur, ASEAN. Every new partnership is another country that does not need American approval. Second, moving contracts out of the United States. The $366 billion defense budget is not a proposal. It is a procurement schedule. Contracts are being awarded right now to European companies, Asian companies, Canadian companies. By July, that 75% dependence on American suppliers will be measurably lower, and once those supply chains move, they do not move back. Third, waiting for Trump to make another mistake. Another bridge threat, another annexation post, another tantrum. Every time Trump acts unpredictably, Carney calls another capital and says, "This is why we built the alternative." And they believe him, because Trump keeps proving him right. Here's what this means for you. If you're American, you're about to watch your country lose influence it held since 1945. Not because of war, because your president threatened allies until they built a world without you. Prices are rising because American companies lost access to the supply chains the 40 nations are building. Jobs are disappearing because factories choose Toronto over Michigan. Not because Toronto is cheaper, because Toronto is predictable. If you are Canadian, your country just became the center of the biggest trade shift in 50 years. That carries risk. Trump could retaliate. The alliance could break. But the alternative is staying dependent on a neighbor who threatens to annex you every 6 months. Carney is betting 40 countries together is safer than one country alone. And 40 countries agree. July 26th, the USMCA review begins. Trump thinks he is negotiating a trade deal. Carney is negotiating the end of American centrality. The 40-nation alliance is watching to see if Canada folds or if the New World Order becomes permanent. This is not about tariffs, not about bridges or jets or budgets. This is about whether the 21st century belongs to American dominance or to middle powers who chose cooperation over coercion. And that answer is being written right now in Ottawa, Brussels, Singapore, Tokyo, in 40 capitals choosing Carney's world over Trump's. The siege is not coming. The siege is here. and Washington just realized too late.